Welcome to H2O In The Know, the podcast about all things related to bottled water. I'm your host, Chris Torres, and today we're going to talk about a topic that's been mainstream for a few years now, an elephant in the room, so to speak. So, there's been much ado about plastic and its impact on the environment recently. And rather than be praised for all the benefits it brings to society, plastic now seems to be described as a modern day villain, killing the planet by the second. But how much of what we're hearing on the news and reading on social media and the internet is actually true? You might know the saying. Don't believe everything you read on the internet, right? Well, joining us today is independent scientist Dr. Chris DeArmitt. He's a fellow and chartered chemist of the Royal Society of Chemistry, as well as a fellow of the Institute of Materials, Minerals, and Mining. He's also the author of a book called The Plastics Paradox. Dr. DeArmitt's on a mission to debunk current myths and misunderstandings about the impact that plastic has on the environment. He's sourced and digested hundreds of peer-reviewed research studies to draw his conclusions. And here's the catch. Dr. DeArmitt has nothing to gain from setting the record straight. He doesn't make, market, or sell plastics, and he doesn't even sell his book. His goal is simple, to educate people so that decisions are made with facts, not fiction. And we're very happy that he's agreed to speak with us today. Hello, Dr. DeArmitt. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk with us today. So let's get right to it. Plastic has been around for decades. So why has it suddenly become the modern day villain?
It's hard to know exactly, but I think there's a number of things going on. Probably the main thing is that people can make money from demonizing plastics. So they're saying bad things and they're making millions and millions and millions of dollars from donations by just spreading things which aren't true. And it sounds like an incredible claim when you hear that. But then if you look at the former president of Greenpeace, Dr. Patrick Moore, he left in disgust and said they're just telling lies for donations and that the other so-called green groups are doing the same thing. So the way to know what's true and what isn't true is to check the evidence. And when you do check what these people say, they tell us we eat a credit card of plastic a week. Science says that would take 20,000 years. So that's how big a lie these people are prepared to tell to get a story, to get their name in the paper and get that donate now button clicking. And that's what I'm trying to uncover here. It's not about, as you said, it's not about defending plastics. It's about let's start with what's true and move on from there.
So what is the truth about the plastic materials and packaging that we use every day in relation to impact on the environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. You always have to say compared to what? Thomas Sowell, he's a very famous economist, and he said if somebody suggests something, you should ask yourself, compared to what? Where's the evidence, and how much will it cost? So let's do that with plastics. If we compare plastics to other materials, we find that they're the greenest packaging solution in 93% of cases studied. So, in almost every case, replacing them means vastly more greenhouse gas. I'm talking 3 times more greenhouse gas, about 4 times more waste, and double the fossil fuel used if you want to go to paper or metal or glass. So, if you think plastics are bad, why would you move to something that's 2 to 4 times worse? That's a question. And they also cost more. These things, because they need more energy, they need more fossil fuel, they need more transportation. They also cost more. So, we're being asked to spend more money for something that is worse for the environment and it just doesn't make any sense. So everything has an impact. Plastic certainly does have an impact, but it's a very small impact. And if you look at food in particular, food is incredibly bad for the environment in terms of the amount of resources we need to make it. If you take a typical piece of packaged food, 3% of the impact of that is the plastic packaging, and the rest of it is the food and the transportation. And so when you do the math, you find out that because that plastic packaging is able to stop the food from spoiling and protect it during transportation, you end up saving 5 to 10 times more CO2 than what you spent on the packaging to make the packaging, right? Because you protected the food, which is 97% of the impact. So that's a problem that people are also making. They're only looking at the impact of the plastic, but they're not looking at the benefit they derived and looking at both sides of that equation, right? If I wanted to know if you're a rich man, I can't walk up to you and say, hey, Chris owes $1,000 on his credit card. What a terrible guy. And then you tell me, hey, I got a house that's worth $1 million and it's fully paid off. Whoa, whoa, whoa. We're not going to count that. We're only going to count the $1,000 credit card debt. And that's what the green groups are doing now. They're only talking about the impact and they're not talking about the benefits and coming to a fair overall picture.
Now, is it true that plastic production is out of control and that we're actually drowning in plastic?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Plastic is 0.4% by weight of the material we use, right? So let's say we are drowning in plastic. What word would we use to describe the other 99.6%, right? If people were really worried about using too much plastic, why would they not be looking, or material, why would they not be looking at the other 99% of materials? So plastic is under 1% by weight and by volume. And anyone who is genuinely concerned about using too much material wouldn't just be talking about 1% of a problem, because that's a sure way to fail, right? I'm a problem solver by profession. And I know that a great way to fail to solve a problem is to start with bad information and obsess over 1% of it. In a recent talk, I made the analogy, let's say you wanted to tidy your house, and instead of tidying the whole house, you just went home and cleaned the cutlery drawer obsessively every day, right? And you polished the knives and forks and you move them around. And that's what we're doing now. Everyone's so obsessed with this 1% of plastics and completely ignoring 99% of materials and impact. And that means we're going to fail as long as we keep fetishizing over plastics and ignoring the big picture.
All right. Now, what about the afterlife of plastics? Do we really have mountains of plastic piling up, just clogging landfills and not degrading?
Well, that's an interesting question too. So scientists have studied that. Plastics are a relatively small part of what goes into a landfill. It's less than food waste, it's less than paper, for example. And plastics were proven to massively reduce the amount of material going to landfill, because on average, 1 pound of plastic replaces 3 to 4 pounds of metal, glass, or paper. And if you don't believe me, and that's scientifically proven, but if you don't believe me, go to your kitchen, weigh a plastic straw, weigh a paper straw, weigh a glass straw, weigh a metal straw. Same with bags, right? If I go to Kroger, my local grocery store, the plastic bag is less than 6 grams. Their paper bag is 60 grams. That's 10 times more material, 10 times more waste, 10 times more litter if I drop it by weight. So, yeah, that's not really true. And when it comes to landfills, they're expressly designed to prevent degradation, right? Because when solids degrade, they give off carbon dioxide. The whole point of a landfill is you bury everything where there's no oxygen and things stop degrading, because we don't want to convert solids into CO2. They've pulled carrots out. I have a book behind me called Rubbish, the Archaeology of Litter, where they did archaeology in landfills and pulled out carrots that were 10 years old and still yellow. They pulled out avocados, they pulled out steaks, they pulled out newspapers from 50 years ago. You could still read them, they still had the date on them. So this idea that plastics are bad because they're not degrading in landfill is completely nonsense, because nothing's supposed to degrade in a landfill.
And are plastics a threat to human health? There's recent research out there that suggests that they shed micro and nanoparticles, and media claims that these particles are bad for our health. What have
Yeah.
you found in your research?
Yeah, I think I've read more on that than anyone in the world. And what I found is there's 50 years of studies on microparticles, including microplastics, and safety of plastics and other materials. And so it's not something new, right? It's not something scary and new and untested. We have 50 years of peer-reviewed testing. I mean, and these are materials that are FDA approved, right, for food use, just like glass is and just like stainless steel is. So these are things that have been tested and tested and tested, thousands of studies. And I've yet to see a single peer-reviewed, credible study that showed any harm from microplastics. In fact, scientists compared what scientists say to what the media is telling the public about microplastics, and that turned out to be that the media has massively distorted this. So the only reason the public is concerned is the media have been lying to us, and that's scientifically peer-reviewed, proven that the media, if you compare what scientists say, which is microplastics are not toxic, and then 93% of the media articles say that they are toxic, right? So if you compare the science and what we're being told, what the public believe, what politicians believe, it's two completely different things. And that's a problem.
So let's talk a bit about recycling. Why are people saying that it's a scam?
Well, the first thing to say about recycling is plastics are the greenest solution with low or no recycling, right? So the public opinion about recycling is we need recycling to make plastics green. But recycling is really the icing on the cake. It makes the cake better, but it's not the cake, right? So plastics are already the lowest impact solution in over 90% of cases, as mentioned. And this is many, many studies. They're independent, they're peer reviewed, they're all around the world. So this is not some kind of outlier. When you do recycle plastics, the regular mechanical way, you grind it up, and just like a piece of cheese, right? You grind it up, remelt it, and make something new. So that makes plastic 70 to 80% greener, meaning less CO2 and energy than they already were, right? So they're already greener than anything else, and now they're 70 to 80% better than that. And I guess the reason that these fake green groups want us to think that recycling isn't working is because they don't want plastics to look good in any way. They're making so many millions from demonizing plastics. They don't want anything that makes plastic looks bad. So they just spread this lie about recycling not working. Recycling's been done for decades and decades. And I would say it's done using standard machinery. It's done all around the world in huge volumes. It's not experimental. This has been going on millions and millions of pounds all the time of plastic being recycled. And And what's the other point I wanted to make? Yeah, it can be hard to make a profit recycling plastic consistently because plastic is so cheap, right? So it's not some sort of scam that people don't want to recycle plastics. It's just people do whatever makes money, right? So if you can make money doing something, somebody's going to do it. And the last point to make is America, because we're in America, right? So everyone's obsessing over these low recycling rates in America, which are maybe 9-10%, whatever. Um, in Europe, it's like 45-50% even higher. So there's no fundamental reason why we can't have more recycling. It is done. It can be done. It's just America's anomalously low, and we need to put in infrastructure and incentives to make that happen.
All right. Now let's talk about pollution. So it's always mentioned that when people start talking about banning single-use plastic, is plastic pollution as bad as people say? And if so, what needs to be done about it?
Yeah. Well, the first thing to say about that is when you say pollution, people imagine in industry, right? They say Coca-Cola's a polluter, but it's a lie, right? They're not dropping their bottles in the ocean. They go out of business overnight if they dropped 1 billion bottles in the ocean just for fun, right? That's not how you make money. So pollution is a word associated with industries, and that's how these green groups have been very clever. They call it pollution, but scientists studied this pollution, and they found out it's litter, right? It's just litter that was dropped in one place and moved through a river or something and popped up somewhere else. And they go, oh, look, it's pollution. But it's not created by industry. It's litter created by people. And we know the solutions to that. It's education, deposit schemes, and fines, right? And this is a key point. As soon as you correctly scientifically identify the cause, just like if you go to the doctor, right? If the doctor gets your illness right, he can give you the right pill, send you on your way, and things will get better. What we're doing now is incorrectly identifying the problem, accusing Coca-Cola or Pepsi and saying that they're the polluters when they're not. And when we should be saying this is litter, it's caused by people, scientifically proven to be dropped intentionally by people. And the solutions are through modifying the behaviors of those people. And I always get pushback on that. They're like, whoa, 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 you can't blame the people. And I'm like, yes, you can. You have to blame the people who were to blame, right? If you blame the wrong people, you come up with solutions that make things worse. And so that's the importance of properly apportioning blame.
So let's talk a little bit about misinformation. What's your biggest fear about the growth in misinformation surrounding plastics?
I think my biggest fear is if you start off with nonsense, you end up doing things that don't make sense. Our children are being taught lies at school. That's why I wrote my book, right? My kids came home, my 2 daughters, they've been told things which are just outright lies. And I pay an insane amount of tax to be in a good school district, to have my daughters educated properly. And the teachers believe the lies, the politicians believe the lies, the consumers believe the lies. And so the consumers are out there demanding things which are scientifically certain to increase harm. They're going around with their cotton bags, swinging their cotton bags, saying, look, I'm an eco-warrior. Cotton bags are 200 times worse than a plastic bag for the environment, right? They're demanding paper when paper is worse, according to every life cycle analysis I've ever read. More waste, more greenhouse gas, more fossil fuel, more harm. So that's really my biggest fear. As a scientist, I fear that people are expressing their passion. They're doing what they think is right, but they're doing it in a complete vacuum of facts. And here's the funny part. If you do a survey of people, they say, oh, I don't believe the media. I'm not that gullible, right? I don't believe the social media. I don't believe the media. Nobody trusts the media. And then you ask them, well, where's the information you believe now about plastics coming from? Oh, it's coming from the media, right? Ask the regular person. If I get pushback from somebody and they're like, oh, you're wrong, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, really? I've read 4,000 scientific studies, right? Unpaid on my own time and shared it all for free, right? How many scientific studies have you read? And their answer is zero, right? These people are, I don't know how out of control their ego is if they think that they're more likely to be correct, having read zero studies ever and just relied on the very media that they admitted that they don't trust.
Now, I'm told that you're not actually pro plastic. So why are you working so hard to set the record straight about this topic?
Well, I think we talked about it earlier. The only way to make sensible choices that actually work and don't make things worse is to start with facts. Unfortunately, regular people don't have the time to read the scientific studies. They're not scientists, so they wouldn't understand them if they did try to read them for the most part. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been on a crusade to put the evidence out there. I've done innumerable podcasts. I've done radio interviews, TV. The book is for free in 5 languages. I've done that all unpaid because the only way to make sensible decisions for a better future is to start with things that are actually true. People have to stop thinking about pro-plastic, anti-plastic. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. I'm black. I'm white. I'm gay. I'm whatever. Stop thinking about group identity. Stop thinking about crusading for or against anything, right? Go out and get the facts and make sure you're on the right side before you start crusading. The time for passion is after you have the facts, not before.
And what kinds of reactions do you get from the work that you're doing on this?
In the very beginning, it was brutal because I was out there telling the truth, and it was the opposite of what everyone believed. But now it's 4 years on since I published the book. Countless people have read it, and they've never found a single mistake in it. So when I go to this, I went to this local event or a recent event in Ottawa, and I met the president of SC Johnson, who's a very lovely guy, Fitz Johnson. He's trying to do the right thing for the environment. He asked to interview me and get some more of the facts. I'm recognized around the world. I'm asked to give keynote speeches all around the world because people are hungry to do the right thing based on the facts. So I'm kind of proud of that. In the beginning, it was like Don Quixote, you're swinging your arms at windmills or whatever it is. But now, 4 years on, it's making quite an impression for the people who are receptive to facts, and that's not everybody.
And you said that this mission that you're on is purely a hobby and it's not your current job.
Yeah.
So how far do you see yourself going with this into the future, and at what scale?
That's hard to tell. Who can predict the future? But I can tell you the response to my speeches is that one guy said, "Can we spend $1 million on a Netflix documentary to get this information out in front of the public?" He was so blown away. He and his wife were so blown away by the power of the evidence. I mean, I've got hundreds and hundreds of studies. And so that's generally the reaction. It's like, what can we do to get the truth out there? Not to defend plastics, just to show people the facts so they can do the right thing. And so who knows where that will lead? I know there's a lot of people who do want the facts to get out there. It should be in everyone's interest to start with solid evidence and take it from there. So we'll have to see where that leads. Who knows? I'll follow the demand. If people want me to scale it up and do a more, because it's me, right? I'm sitting here on a couch with no money, no funding, doing this out of my own money, my own time. My real job is being a scientist, right? Making better plastics, formulating. I'm like a cook for plastics, right? I decide what goes in there and all of that kind of stuff. That's what I do for a living. Apple comes to me, and other companies, Procter and Gamble, come to me for advice. That's what I actually do for a living. As you said, this is just a hobby, and I've got to keep it real, right? I can't be spending my whole week on a hobby either. So that kind of limits how far my reach can be, as long as I'm limiting my time.
All right, Dr. DeArmitt, is there anything else out there on this topic that I haven't touched on that you feel like the listeners might need to know?
Yeah. Well, I was just in Ottawa, as I said, and so we flew, thousands and thousands of people flew to talk about an emergency that doesn't exist. Let me give you an example, right? So they're saying that the oceans are choking in plastic, right? And it's just a lie. If you look at the amount of plastic, scientists literally said it's negligible, right? If you look at the amount of bottles, so they did a scoop, right? They go to the ocean gyre, this thing that is not a floating island, it's just an area with a little bit more plastic. They scoop it up with a net and they analyze everything in there. It's 85% nets and fishing gear. And that does cause harm, right? Things get trapped in it. And that's where we need to put our attention and our legislation. Of that, they found 0 bags, 1 straw, and a couple of bottles. So the total of all these consumer items that we're talking about here, talking about banning them, talking about getting rid of them because the ocean is choking in them, the total content was 0.03% of these things we're proposing to ban. They're not getting into the ocean. I mean, they shouldn't be there, right? But the ocean is not choking on these things. There's 0 evidence of harm from these nurdles people talk about, or from bottle caps, or from bags, which another study had a ship and it went around the world 4 times with a net behind it before it found 1 piece of plastic bag. Can you imagine going 100,000 miles to pull up 1 small piece of bag in your net? And this is what these green groups are talking about. They're complete shysters. They're just making stuff up. And here's the sad part, right? This trip to Ottawa, I calculated my environmental footprint for that flight, a round trip flight to Ottawa, was the same as my lifetime consumption of PET bottles. It's the same as 10,000 PET bottles. So that means thousands of people flew and made a giant impact on the environment to talk about an emergency that was made up by these environmental groups. And that's the sad part. The people that we trust to tell us the truth and to care about the environment have completely abandoned the environment and are just doing more harm than anyone, because the three contributors, the worst contributors to the environment, are flying, driving, and eating meat. So it's ironic, right? We're obsessing over things that make 0 difference, right? And they're the greenest solution. And instead we're flying around. And this is not the first meeting, right? This is the 4th meeting that they've called. There's going to be a 5th one in South Korea where thousands more people fly to South Korea to discuss an imaginary emergency that makes them powerful and makes them rich, but actually harms everybody's future. So that's the thought that I'd like to leave people on. Don't trust people who have a shiny donate now button next to what they're saying. Trust scientists who are working unpaid and who provide you links to the evidence, the scientific evidence to prove what they're saying.
All right. All right, Dr. DeArmitt, thank you again for coming on with us today for this discussion and setting the record straight. And for our listeners, if you're interested in hearing more from Dr. DeArmitt or you're interested in downloading his free book, visit his website at plasticsparadox.com.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
And that's it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to H2O In The Know, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, or SoundCloud. I'm Chris Torres signing off. We'll talk to you again soon. H2O In The Know is brought to you by the International Bottled Water Association, a nonprofit organization that encourages healthy hydration and environmental responsibility on behalf of the bottled water industry.